Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, before we get started on where we left off, hi guys, I want to address with you a good question that Ken asked me earlier, and I want to kind of redo it with you guys because it was definitely a good learning moment for him, and I think it would be a good learning moment for all of you, except for maybe Chris, because he's got it figured out now. He's the Constitution superstar now, right?
Yeah. He's gonna be hated in college.
Yeah, now everybody hates him. Now he asked me, he says, well, where in the Constitution does it say that the federal government's not supposed to mess around with local issues? They're not supposed to get involved, locally. Where does it say in the Constitution they can't do that? I said, well, it doesn't say they can't. He kind of cocks his head. Well, it's because the question was asked wrong. It wasn't where in the Constitution does it say they can't, it's where in the Constitution does it say they can. And it doesn't, so they can't. The way the Constitution, remember, is written, it gives authorities to the federal government. So if the authority's not there, they can't do it. If it's not prohibited to states, then it's a state issue. If it's not given to the federal government and it's prohibited to the states, then neither can do it. A great example of that last one would be ex post facto law, retroactive law. Neither one's allowed to do it. And then we got something like, naturalization, making rules for naturalization. Article 1, Section 8, it gives it specifically to the federal government, so they're the ones that make those rules. States can't. What about identification? He brought up the real ID. We've talked about that off and on. So IDs. Well, there's nothing in the Constitution that gives the federal government authority over identification, so they're not supposed to have any say, any standard, anything constitutionally. And it's not prohibited to states, therefore it's a state issue. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because it was a good question when he asked me it, but it was kind of funny because when I said, well, that's, the question's not right. It's not where does it say they can't, it's where does it say they can. And he's all, but this is what, your fourth time here, or fifth time here,
yeah.
Something? So he's kind of figuring it out still. I remember when Dennis first started coming here, and he reminded me of another gentleman, Dale, who used to come to the Temecula class. And for the first few months, he was, no, well, wait a second. I'm trying to wrap my brain around this because we've been told such garbage that sometimes we have trouble understanding the way it's supposed to really be. And I told him, and he was saying, well, gosh, this really needs to be out there. I told him, yeah, but here's the sad part about it. Aside from my students that I've had where they get it, people out there that I know of that know it like I do and teach it like I do, I've got more fingers than those people. I mean, you got David Barton, you got Chris Ann Hall, Chad Kent, me, Steve Jackson. I'm running out of names already. So it just, unfortunately, over the last 2 centuries, we have been taught so much garbage that we're convinced of something, that this is something totally different than what it originally was supposed to mean. So that's the whole purpose of this class. So it's good to see you, Gary. Glad you're here. Hopefully you enjoy this enough and you'll keep coming back. If it gets too cold, let me know and I'll turn off the AC. It was a little warm in here when I got here, so I did turn it on. It wasn't as bad as usual. Usually I get here, it's like the upper 80s or 90s in this room and all that. But anyway, okay, Article 2, and that's where we left off last week. Every week, it's okay if we're not at the beginning. Every week you can learn something. Every class stands alone.
How long is this class?
1 hour each.
That's what I thought.
1 hour, and then as in how long, depending on how long it takes. There's been times it's taken us a year to go through the Constitution. There's been times I've done it within 3 months. Mm-hmm. So it depends on how much we chit chat, how many questions are asked. How quick. I'm trying to speed it up a little bit more. So I appreciate the fact that you guys haven't been as chit chatty as in the past. I've had classes in the past where there was so many people, it would almost become a tea party meeting, instead of class, because everyone talked about politics. As a matter of fact, that's what used to happen in Temecula when I'd have the 30, 40 people showing up. You have 30, 40 people, and they're all wanting to, add their politics or something like that,
1 hour, okay.
But anyway, okay. So Article 2 Well, I'm trying to remember exactly where we left off now. I'll get there. So page 9. Actually, you know what? Now I'm thinking about page 10, because we talked about the Electoral College last week. Yeah. We're on page 10. We just finished with the Electoral College last week. I think it was the last thing we talked about, if I remember properly, right? See, does that sound familiar, Chris? All right. Let me get a couple pins up here. The next part is natural born citizen. I tell you what, every time I talk about this, it becomes an interesting discussion, especially during the last presidency. So page 10, second to last paragraph, here's what it reads. No person except a natural born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of president. All right, so natural born citizen. Now, real quick, it says, or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution. Why? There was no such thing as a natural born citizen that was old enough to be president yet. We'd only been a country since 1776. So, all the natural born citizens were 11 years old or younger. So, at the time of the adoption of this, citizen. Now, what's that telling you though? There's a difference between citizen.
What section are you reading out of now?
We're on section, Article 2, Section 1 on page 10.
Okay.
And but here's what it's telling us. There's a difference between citizen and natural born citizen. It's giving you a difference right there. And I've had this argument. Matter of fact, that in 2016, I wound up on AM 590 like 3 or 4 times as a guest, because all these hosts are like, wait a second, you know, I'm hearing you're saying that Ted Cruz is not eligible for the presidency, and he wasn't. And don't get me wrong, I like Ted Cruz. I think he's a fantastic senator, but technically he wasn't eligible. Why? Well, first of all, the first thing that they were trying to wrap their brain around is, well, there's a difference between citizen and natural born citizen, that there's 2 separate classes. So no, it's the same thing. It says right here, no person except a natural born citizen or a citizen of the United States. It's telling you right there, they're 2 different things, right? It wouldn't be an or, they're different things. So now, what's the difference? Okay, a citizen can be do that, native born. They can be naturalized, which is, in other words, made citizen by law, or there could be based on the rule of law. For example, there was a rule of law that said if you weren't born in the United States, but you had at least one parent that was an American citizen, or you were born in American territory, you were still a citizen. Okay? So what's the difference? What's a natural born citizen? What does that mean? Our evidence, I'm going to give you 3 pieces of evidence first before I explain it. There's 3 pieces of evidence, because what happens here is, it didn't explain what it means, right? It just says natural born citizen. It doesn't say what a natural born citizen is. Now, why wouldn't they explain it? Why wouldn't they give you the definition in the Constitution? Why do you think?
It was understood.
It was understood. It was a common term. It was understood. All right, so our evidence on why it was understood, number 1 is something called Vattel's, I can't remember if it was 1 L, 2 L, I think it's 2 L's. Law of Nations. I'll talk about each of these in a minute. The Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1790. And then later on, a later, let me get a different one. And a later thing that came up that actually nailed it, Minor versus Happersett in 1875. Morrison Waite was the name of the Chief Justice, and it was his opinion that we're going to discuss. So there's our 3 pieces of proof. So what does natural born citizen mean? According to these pieces of evidence, and I'll explain them in a minute, a natural born citizen means that both parents were citizens at the time of your birth. In order to be a natural born citizen, has nothing to do with where you were born and everything has to do with your parents. So when they start talking about some birth certificate in Hawaii and all this sort of stuff, birth certificate in Hawaii doesn't matter. I don't care if it's real, if it's fake, I really don't care. The guy could have been born on the front steps of the White House. He wasn't eligible by his own admittance because he said his father was not a citizen at the time of his birth. Now, of course, if his father was Frank Marshall Davis, he would be a natural born citizen. That's the second one.
Well, why do you think the founding
Teal
fathers?
Chrysler is got their head on top.
What, say it again?
Softball question.
Okay. He's
Why
trying
do
to
you-
send me in a certain direction, apparently.
Why do you think the founding fathers would have any concerns about a person becoming president of the United States who had parents that weren't necessarily both U.S. citizens at the time he was born?
Funny you should ask that, because I was actually gonna go into that, but you've gone through this before, so you knew that was coming. That's a good question though, but let's see if any of you guys remember or know. I know she's not gonna know. Why would the founding fathers be concerned whether or not the person had two citizen parents at the time of their birth?
What was going on at the time?
Loyalty.
What was that?
Loyalty.
Loyalty? So who was the danger when you
Tories.
The Tories.
I was gonna say, what if you're a Tory after 1776? You know, are you automatically a citizen?
Yeah, well, you're a citizen, but you're not a natural born citizen because most of the Tories, they had one parent that was born in Britain and was a citizen of Britain at the time of their birth. Tories were the loyalists, the people who were in the States, but they were loyal to the British Empire. And the Tories tended, not every time, but tended to have at least one parent that was of British birth or British citizenship.
Who's the most famous person that everybody knows that was a traitor at the time?
Oh, Benedict Arnold.
And his parentage was what?
Yeah, he was a Tory.
So I think they learned a lesson that
Yeah.
as much as possible, we don't wanna have any split allegiances. We're gonna have to tough it out for a couple of years, cause like you say, you know.
Well, you don't want
nobody old
the
enough to be
possibility
president.
of someone can become a president that has 1 foot in America and 1 foot in Britain. Or 1 foot in America and 1 foot in some other country. Because, first of all, we're exceptional. We're an exception to the rule. We're different than every other country. And if someone has 1 foot in another country, they're also gonna have those foreign concepts of politics and government in their mind.
But can
And they're
you-
gonna wanna apply that to our system, or they're gonna wanna overthrow or whatever. I mean, there's, a long list of possibilities. Okay, so now, what is Vattel's Law of Nations? Prior to us becoming a country, in Europe, there were legal terms that everybody understood, and what Vattel did is he put them into a volume so that they were available for everybody in case there was, it was just common legal things that Europe shared. Natural born citizen is in there. And if you read it very carefully, it talks about the importance of the lineage of both parents. Immigration Naturalization Act of 1790 originally did have the definition of natural born citizen in it, requiring parents, plural, were citizens of the United States. In 1795, the Immigration Naturalization Act was rewritten without that definition. And a lot of people who will argue the point against what I'm telling you will say, well, that proves that that wasn't the definition, that they changed it. No. Natural born citizen had nothing to do with the Immigration Naturalization Act in 1785, so they decided not to include the definition. Maina versus Hackerset was actually a case regarding women's rights. And the Morrison Wade, the Chief Justice, was trying to explain how a woman was just as important to society as a man, that they are just as much a participant in the society, just as any natural born citizen would be to their society. And then he describes what a natural born citizen is: two parents at the time of birth. Now, even though it was unrelated to the case, it's interesting that he had it right. Well, it was still close enough to the founding that they still knew. But as we've moved away, the lexicon has changed. And like, remember when we were talking about the word regulate? You know, in other words, or how the language has been altered, and they think that's how you can alter the Constitution. Okay, so original language, based on these, natural born citizens, both parents are citizens at the time of birth. It was funny because one of the shows that I was on 590 when I was arguing this was on Ed Hoffman's Main Event, and Ed likes me and he trusts me as a Constitution guy, and so he brings into debate against me on this a constitutional professor from the University of Redlands and a constitutional lawyer. I'm like telling him, I'm like, well, either you really trust and believe in me, or you really don't like me and you really want to see me burn. One of the two. So anyway, I'm just using my arguments and a few others, and I'm going through the different, I'm explaining the Tories and all that jazz. And at one point, when I was discussing Minor versus Happerset, and I was explaining, what had gone on, and the constitutional professor says, I don't have an answer for that one. I knew I'd won that one when I heard that. Later on, I'm not telling you this to toot a horn or anything, it's just because sometimes education doesn't always necessarily mean that you know what you're talking about. So we're out in the parking lot later on. He walks up, he says, hey, gosh, I've never come across anybody that knows this history of Constitution like you do. You've got to have at least a master's, right? Where'd you go? Where'd you get your degree? I got about 30 units of night school, actually. And he's like, huh? But see, I'm what they call that, didactic. I'm self-taught. I made it my business to know this stuff. I've studied all the original writings. And but the reason why I bring that up is it tells me that our academia doesn't understand this. The dude is a constitutional professor, and I bested him. It's a shame when even our own academia isn't following this. I've had 3 people who have gone through law school that have gone through the Constitution with me, and all 3 of them told me the same thing. They learned more about the Constitution from me than they did in law school. You know why? Because in law school, they don't open this. It's all about what judges have said it means. And what was it, your son with constitutional law class, the first thing they talked about was judicial review.
Sacred cow.
The sacred cow.
And he did say, I'll give him credit, he says, I got to prepare you for the real world. He says there are people that will say that
Purists, right?
And that in 1803,
Like
when this case was made, that it was incorrect. He says, it's been 200 years, and that's just the way things are now, so I'm just teaching you this is the real world you're going to deal with. But
I wonder if deep down he is a purist like me, but he just can't.
no, I don't think so.
No?
No, but I was going to say, in your case, the old saying that there's people that know nothing, but they know that they know nothing, so teach them. And then there's people that know nothing, but don't know that they know nothing, and therefore you better be careful of them. When you started studying the Constitution, you didn't have a law degree. You didn't have anybody really teaching you, so you just did an honest job of going back and reading the original stuff for yourself. And like you say, in law school, they don't start.
So I didn't have that to poison me.
That's right.
And that's
you
funny.
went to the source because you didn't have a guy there who you were going to listen to and say he's the truth teller of all truth.
And that's funny that you bring that up, because when I teach this to the adults, and I can't count how many times heads basically explode, because it's like, wow, how do I wrap my mind? This is hard to, because we've been taught so many. I teach on Wednesdays. I teach homeschoolers in their 10th, 11th, 12th grade. These kids, man, they're easy, man, because they're like little sponges. Because see, they haven't been exposed to the garbage, and so they're just soaking it right in. So, once again, their minds are a clean slate when it comes to stuff. They haven't been taught judicial review and all that other stuff is the way it is, and been convinced all their life to believe that, and then suddenly someone comes along and says, guess what you've been believing all your life is wrong. Well, it's hard to, switch gears and U-turn off of.
I've told my son, UCLA history major, this is a living, breathing document.
You what?
My son went to UCLA, studied history.
Yeah, well, we're told that all the time, aren't we?
They say this.
They didn't tell that to my daughter today. They just said it's for white people, and that was the end of this discussion. Her teachers actually said that.
White
They don't
privilege.
deal with it, this is just for white people or something.
Well, why is it not a living, breathing document? You remember what we talked about, what we said on that, why isn't it? Because it's a social contract.
Contract law.
This is a contract between the states to create a federal government. And when you're talking about contract law, you know, case law and precedent and all that is not as important as, is it in the contract or isn't it? That's what's important. Either it's in the contract or it's not. That's the way contract law works. That's the way this works. It's a contract. It's a social contract. John Locke and James Madison both called constitutions, and James Madison, he called this constitution a social contract. Because it is. The states got together and made an agreement together to form a federal government to handle some of the duties that they knew they couldn't or shouldn't. Because they realized they needed a stronger government. But at the same time, they feared the government becoming too strong. I think that's Josie. No, that's somebody else. We'll find out. The social contract between the states. So what does that mean? If the states got together with their delegates to create this document to create the federal government, they created the federal government. That makes them the federal government's parents. So that means the federal government then needs to ask its parents for permission if it wants more authorities. That's what the amendment process is all about. Or at least one of the ways to amend the Constitution is Congress, the federal government, proposes an amendment to ask permission, and then the states, the parents, 3/4 of them gotta say it's good. And it was great when I was talking to the kids in my government class, this was either last week or the week before, and I used to, I asked, any of you guys drive yet? And 2 of them did. It's all right, so when you ask to use the car, does your parents always say yes? Almost always. So since they almost always say yes, you can just assume next time they're gonna say yes and just take the car anyway, right? Without asking? Well, no. Well, why not? Well, they're my parents. Yet we have a federal government that's taken upon itself to do things without asking the parents. Like the real ID. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives them that authority. They haven't asked for the permission. The states haven't given them permission, but they're doing it anyway. So it's time for the states to take away the car keys. Problem is, state legislatures and we the people, we don't realize we're the parents. Because see, when the federal government was created, it was created to serve the people and serve the states, not rule over them. But we've been convinced over all this time that they rule over us. They're the authority. Well, federal supremacy. Over everything. Really? Yeah, hierarchy. Don't you know, Doug? Steps of the ladder. Starts in the local courts, gets to the state courts, and goes to the federal courts because they're the bosses. No. We're the bosses. And we have forgotten that. Hence the reason why we're learning this. It's like Chris is, he's all nods because he's right with me. He's gone through this. He really has gotten it, and I'm proud of you, brother. But, and one of the things that, and Skip, you're about there, and I know Dennis is, there, but you guys, you're always learning, I know that. Even Chris, I think you're still learning, right?
Yeah.
I'm still learning. Sometimes someone asks me a question, and I go, let me look that up. Every once in a while, it's not often, but it does happen. But it's like, you have a broken down car in the driveway, right? Gotta fix it. But how do you fix it if you don't know how it's supposed to properly run? Right? So, how do we fix our broken car, our government, if we don't know how it's supposed to properly run? And here's the thing, you pop into this government, you know what you find out? Not only are things messed up with it, there's stuff missing. All right, and we have to know what's supposed to be in it. That's the reason why, and we'll get to it later on in another class, that's the reason why my #1 wish list is repeal that 17th Amendment. It took away something that needs to be there. This Kavanaugh knucklehead garbage, knuckle-dragging junk that went on wouldn't have happened if the 17th Amendment had never been put in play, if the senators were representatives of the state legislatures. It would be a totally different ballgame, and also would probably be mostly red too.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we got Democrats now. I can't remember who it was now. There was a Democrat that said, we got to change this thing about the Senate because North Dakota has 2 senators have just as big a voice as the senators from New York. That's not right. No, that was the point.
Yeah, that was, I think, part of the discussion
Yeah.
in the Constitution.
Yeah, that was the point, to give these little states enough of a voice that they are not trampled all over by the population centers. Same thing with electoral college, we talked about that last week, same thing. To give these, to protect the minority. See the left, when they hear that, they say, oh, to protect the minorities. No, that's not what I said, protect the minority vote, those smaller states. So they have a bigger voice than they would in a
That's
democracy.
all about protecting the minority.
No, you start with democracy with me. All right, so get back to natural born citizen. It's all about protecting our union. We don't want somebody who doesn't have full allegiance to our country to be president of the United States. Therefore, we want our president to be natural born. Both parents were citizens at the time of birth.
Well, that still doesn't mean the guy can't be a jackass.
Well,
That's for sure.
I mean, there's a lot of natural born people in Congress and in the Senate right now that ought to be taken out, educated.
yeah, well, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but when I was in construction, there was a guy that had a shirt that said that. It said, my mama said when I grow up I could be anything I want, and on the back it said, so I decided to be a jackass. But anyway. Anyway, so get back where we were. Because we learned with the last president, right? You got a parent from that was born in another country, what happens? His allegiance was divided, wasn't it?
He was his real dad again.
Yeah, I'm still thinking Frank Marshall Davis was dad. That's beside the point. In that case, he would have been an natural born citizen, but he would have been more of a communist than we even thought before. But that's beside the point. Trying not to get into a political discussion. This is supposed to be a constitution discussion. All right. Any questions, comments?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, it goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about why isn't it a rule that our presidents should know that Constitution as a requirement before becoming president?
They are supposed to, aren't we all?
But as,
You know, it's funny because back in 2012 or 14, I can't remember which year now, I had considered running for Congress, and I actually had an exploratory committee, and I had my first meeting in exploratory committee. About 50 people showed up, and I gave my little speech and the way I would want to run my campaign if I did, and then where we get sources of funding and all sort of stuff. And so first hand goes up and says, well, Doug, if you get elected to Congress, well, what's the first thing you would do? And I said, well, start Constitution classes, of course. And everybody cheered. I said, whoa, wait a second. That doesn't mean those knuckleheads will show up. They don't want to learn this. This is an obstacle to them. It gets in the way with because it's about limiting the government. They don't want a limited government. They want a government that does everything. Remember we were talking about highway funds earlier? In 1817, James Madison vetoed a bill that Congress put forth recommending that that roads were federalized, that the federal government paid for those roads and the boatways. And James Madison vetoed it. So hey,
1950s?
there is nothing in the Constitution that gives us that authority. And Congress said, well, yeah, no, there's authority because, military equipment will be using those roads and it's for the general welfare. And in his veto, James Madison explained, that's not what the general welfare clauses are for. It's a condition of, what's going on if the Constitution is followed. A general condition that all's well. It's not an excuse to make law. He said in his veto, if that was the definition, then the federal government could do anything they wanted. And so it was vetoed. In the 1950s, Interstate Highway Act, Eisenhower wasn't quite the constitutionalist that James Madison was, and he signed it. And guess what? If you read those two bills, they're almost read identically. Same excuses. Well, gosh, Doug, don't you like your freeways? Don't you like your highways? So you telling me if the federal government didn't fund that stuff and do that stuff, it wouldn't happen? You don't think the states would get the bright idea, hey, maybe we need some highways. Maybe we need to connect them between states. I mean, what has happened now since we got the federal funding? What does the federal government do? It goes back to Real ID, or the 55 speed limit, or the 21 voting age. If you don't do what we tell you, we'll keep your funds. Oh, it's voluntary. It's voluntary if you do what we tell you, but you won't get your funds. It's blackmail. That's why they weren't supposed to be funding that stuff. Federal government wasn't created for all this internal stuff. It was created for the external stuff: war, trade, borders, things like that, right? Protect us from invasion, protect our trade routes, things like that. Maritime law. That's what the federal government's for. Remember, in Article 1, Section 4, there's a line that says the Congress will meet at least once every year. There was those that argued that was too often. What are we going to do? Unless we're at war, there's nothing to do. Because all the authorities belong to the states internally. So what's the federal government supposed to do? The federal government's not supposed to be the monster it is. Back in 2006, a friend of mine and myself, we went through the entire federal budget and we separated federal spending into two piles: constitutional and unconstitutional. The unconstitutional pile was 85% of federal spending. And that was during Bush. I couldn't even imagine where it got during the Obama administration. 85% unconstitutional. You know what's funny is I was listening to Steve Jackson, who's another constitutionalist. He's up in LA. And I was at Los Angeles. I was at a forum that I was invited to be a speaker at. And he was the first speaker. A guy named Keith Hardy was the second speaker. I was the third speaker. I get the back cleanup, which meant I needed to hit a home run. And I did. But anyway, Steve Jackson, he gets up there and he says, 80 to 85% of the federal government is unconstitutional, especially when it comes to spending. I'm like, wow, I'm not the only constitutionalist that came across this. So he did his own research. He came up with pretty much the same numbers. Which tells me that Loki and I, Tim Curlin, that was his nickname, Loki, we had it right when we came up with 2006. Think about that. We have a federal government that operates 85% in a manner they're not supposed to.
That means you're spending my money.
That means they're spending your money, right?
Yeah, but it's only, $20 trillion,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
what are you worried about?
Yeah, and besides, now that you're getting a little bit more back, it's just crumbs, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's get back to the president here. Continue down Article 2. Okay, so we talked about natural born citizen, and it continues, neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained the age of 35 years. How old was it for Senate? 30. What was it for a House? Are they thinking that as you get older, you might have a little more wisdom and maybe a little more character? Is that what's going on here?
Maybe back then, but not now. Yeah.
Oh, you're funny.
No.
All right, and been 14 years a resident within the United States. So if you traveled abroad, you need to have been, was a resident somewhere else. So once again, they don't want foreign influences. Okay. The next portion is in brackets, which means it no longer applies. It was changed by the 25th Amendment. So I'm going to skip that because we're going to come back to it when we get to the 25th Amendment. Okay. So we're not going to talk about that part of it right now. All right. Top of page 11, the president shall, at stated times, receive for his services a compensation. Receive for his services a compensation. His services. A compensation. Does that sound like a professional politician? There's two terms that they use when it comes to money in the Constitution. One is compensation. And the other one, and I think we talked about this in Article 1, but I'll go over it again, is emoluments. Emoluments are money that comes to you because it's like a salary, or it's just due to you. It's expected, it's due to you. So it's a salary, or it's a payment for something that you did. That's what emoluments are. What's compensation? You're compensated for something. It's not a salary. What is it?
Almost a reimbursement.
It's like a reimbursement.
If you compensate, you're balancing.
Right. It's a reimbursement. It's for his services. He's not a professional politician that's supposed to receive a salary because it's his job. He is giving from himself as a servant, services, servant government. Guess what? They use the same term, compensation, for the judges and for the representatives and the senators.
If I
They
get,
don't use emoluments until you start talking about things like Secretary of State.
if I get a good job and they give me a card to get around, that's part of my compensation. So I'm just wondering, is Air Force One of his compensations? Is that his, you know, you gotta get around? Is that?
Well, he's just gotta get around, you know, you gotta protect the president, it's, you know, the best vehicle for whatever it is, that's not his. He's just being allowed to use it while he's,
Back then, you know, did he?
yeah, but back then he rode a horse.
Yeah.
Or if you were George Washington, you rode a horse out to Kentucky because there's a whiskey rebellion going on and just your mere presence stops the entire rebellion. Back then.
Back when it,
Now they scratch on the doors with their nails during the,
Supreme Court.
during the Supreme, during Kavanaugh's, swearing in ceremony.
I wish I would've been, I wish I would've been a cop there.
Alright, so it's a compensation. Which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected. He doesn't get a raise, he does not get a reduction in compensation because they didn't want briberies or punishments through money being used against the president by the lawmakers. And he shall not receive within that period any other emolument from the United States or any of them. Any of them. Who's the them?
The people?
States. Remember, the states are a pluralism here. The United States are, not the United States is. Back then, it was these states that are united in this union. It was a plurality of states. They were them. Now, instead of the United States being a voluntary union of them, it has become an it. The United States is. Oh, by the way, there's a bunch of states, but we treat them like provinces. But back then, the states were like members of the family, and they each were unique, and they were each a part of that bigger family, and they each had a say in it, and they were each autonomous and handled their own issues individually. My, how things have changed. Any questions? Any comments?
Yeah, you want to give the definition of emolument?
Salary or payment. All right. Here's the oath. Before he enter on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. What's the difference? Oath or affirmation? What's the difference? Oath is to God. Affirmation isn't. Why would they do that? Why would they give you the choice of, well, there's some people don't believe in God. There was actually some Christian sects that believe that swearing to God was a sin. So they would give an affirmation also. So there's a choice there, oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend. Boy, it sounds like something I usually use, huh? Protect, preserve, promote. And defend the Constitution of the United States.
what happened?
What happened?
Why do you think they didn't put in the United States of America? Just curious.
I don't know, what do you think? Does it go back to that plurality of states again, possibly?
Or
I
was
haven't
it-
really thought about it, to be honest with you. That's a good question.
Well, we always say USA, everybody, you know.
Well, you know what? Here's something else. I don't see this thing about putting your hand on the Bible in here. Do you see it in there? Why did they do that then?
I think it's a visible confirmation. It's actual touching something.
Well, whose idea was that? George Washington himself. He said, wait a second, I don't want to do this stuff unless I put my hand on the Bible. And so they said, okay, well, we got to go find a Bible. At this late moment, right before the swearing in, and now he wants a Bible. We got to go find a Bible. You know where they found the Bible? At the Masonic Lodge, right up the street.
What's wrong with that picture?
Yeah, well, when we get into the stories about Masons, understand that Masonry then and Great Masonry now are two different animals.
Did that one make it into the Smithsonian?
I would think so. I don't know, but I would think so. That's a good question. I'll have to find out. Now I'm curious
I
myself.
thought it was interesting when Drew Brees threw the pass that put him ahead of Peyton Manning, you know, and I thought, okay, the guy who caught that is not throwing that into the stands. He gives it to Drew. Drew carries it over and kisses all his family, and then there's a guy in a suit. And he gives it to that guy, and I thought, okay, that guy's holding it for Drew.
Right.
That guy is the president of the Football Hall of Fame, because that ball will go into the Hall of Fame.
Right.
And obviously, I'm just curious if anybody was thinking ahead, like, this is the Bible, the first president of the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, or
First,
did it just
well,
wind
first
up
president of the
going
United States
back?
under the Constitution.
Yeah,
Because George Washington was not the first president of the United States, was he?
okay, yeah.
John Hanson was.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. George Washington was the first president under the Constitution. Before the Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation, and it was like 9 different presidents. Actually, there was 11, but 2 of them served twice, so it was like 9. I think that's the number. I might
It's
be
a lot of guys.
I know you never hear
Well,
about it.
because they only have 1-year terms.
Oh,
Still, you think you'd hear about it.
Yeah. Well, no. It's not like they teach history anymore in the academia. Come on, or the public schools. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, but I look at history and I haven't even heard about the
Well, you've heard my story about my nephew, right? Right here in the Corona Unified School District. And he's all excited. He's like a little clone of me, which just drives my brother nuts. And he's all excited about, you know, the history class in 6th grade, because there was a chapter on the Constitution. Couldn't wait till they got to the Constitution. They got to the chapter, they skipped over it. He asked the teacher, why did we skip over that chapter? And she says, Brandon, you have to understand, this is word for word, you have to understand we only have so much time, so we have to skip over what's not important.
Whoa.
Oh,
Exact
wow.
words. Kid was dumbstruck, so he went to the principal and asked him about it. He was given the same answer. What are the odds of that?
Unbelievable.
Meanwhile, earlier this year, I think it was February, March, and I was at a meet and greet of LA County candidates down at the Trump National Course there in Pico Rivera, not Pico Rivera,
all states.
no,
I was with you, I mean, that's.
San Pedro.
San Pedro.
Out in San Pedro, and I've got, 25 at that time. At one point it was like 50 or more, and it was dwindling, the number of
No,
people.
there was a couple hundred people out there on the grass, and people were.
Yeah, the number was dwindling, but anyway, so I'm giving two,
By the time he spoke, it was like third to last, after an hour and a half, 2 hours, and most of the people had left.
Yeah, but, and he said, hey Doug, you got 2 minutes. I'm like, what am I gonna do in 2 minutes? You know what? I'm gonna have them recite the preamble with me. He was with me, by the way. Yeah, I'm gonna have them recite the preamble with me, and then I'm gonna give a little thing about the preamble, which you've heard me talk about. And so I began, all right, so everybody join me. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, one person in that entire crowd joined me. And she was the elder person in the crowd.
I was saying, she was a lady, yeah.
Yeah, it was a lady,
Yeah.
and she was the oldest person that visibly looked like she was the eldest person in the crowd. Why? Because she learned how to recite it in school. All the youngsters sure as hell didn't. Because after all, you gotta skip over something, what's not important, right? Drives me nuts. Alright, continue on. So we've got this oath, affirmation, faithfully execute. It's funny, I'm gonna skip something real quick. I'm gonna jump over to page 12. Go over to page 12, just flip the page once. So right above where it says section 4, what does it say? He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Same language. His job was to faithfully execute. When you hear the word faithfully, what does that make you think of? That's a big time word, isn't it? That's an important word. It's almost religious.
He might be a religious person.
Might be, but I mean, it's a serious deal.
Yeah.
If you're expected to faithfully do something, what does that mean? Not just that you need to do it, but, with all your heart and soul, it's important, it really needs to be done right, all of those things that go along with it. Right? Faithfully execute. Who's the last president you felt faithfully executed the laws of the United States, not counting the current president? Maybe Reagan? Maybe Calvin Coolidge?
Kennedy wanted to.
Well, what about before Calvin Coolidge? Maybe. I mean, you might have to go all the way back to founding fathers. Andrew Jackson started messing everything up. father of the Democratic Party.
Andrew Jackson once said, that liberty is forever vigilant. Is that?
Yeah, he was a stern, strong president, and economically I liked him in the sense that he got rid of the central bank. But remember, he's the first Democrat, so to speak.
Liberty is forever vigilant. Was that?
Yeah.
Jackson?
But he believed in pure democracy. Hence the reason why he's the father of the Democratic Party. Pure democracy. Pure democracy, which is the tyranny of the majority. Where 51% can take away by vote, can take away the rights of the other 49%. We're not a democracy. We're not supposed to be a democracy. There are checks and balances in here that make us a republic. Right?
Yes, sir.
And Lord, I love people like Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson. Every time I hear the word democracy come out of their mouth, I want to reach through that tube, grab the mouth and go, no!
Well, Henry starting to say republic now instead of democracy.
Is he?
Yeah, he's starting to say.
Maybe David Barton got to him or something.
Yeah, he's starting to say republic.
I don't think I've ever heard Glenn Beck say democracy.
Oh, I agree about
Of course, I don't really watch him anymore, but
Yeah.
you know, I never really watched him much. My mom used to watch him a lot, so I knew everything about Glenn because my mom would tell me like almost every day.
I don't
But-
watch him, but I heard another radio guy say yesterday's show with Ellison or something like that was, Glenn Beck said it was the best show he ever did. Just out of the park.
I'm thinking my show last Saturday was the best show I ever did.
Well,
So you listened to last Saturday's show, right?
yeah,
Was it pretty good?
it was, but you didn't let.
Yeah, I know you
Ellen
missed
speak.
Dennis. I mean, it made you cry that Dennis wasn't there, but aside from that, it was pretty good, right?
Well, Ellen speaking, I don't know about that cute guy.
You don't know? Oh, Double X when he called in?
Relax,
Yeah, okay. Well, he's a caller.
okay.
No, I told you, my opinion about all that, but yeah, I'm a Constitution guy. I don't concentrate on that. I concentrate on this. So while I will dabble every
Well,
once
he
in a while
was
in
saying
different
it like-
stuff, this is my main
Gotta listen to
focus.
Q, man. He knows what's going on.
Yeah.
You want the
Well,
insight,
he-
you gotta go to Q.
Double X and my friend Randy Feeney, who's the one that set me up with all my equipment to start doing video. Those are the two people that are really kind of into it and kind of informed me. And in the case of Randy, he's a programmer, kind of a tech guy and stuff. It's very interesting stuff. I'm not going to get into that. Once again, I'm a Constitution guy. I'm not the conspiracy guy. All right. I am going to start Article 2, Section 2. But technically that's on the next handout. So and you know what? I gotta take a look at something because I can't remember if I'm gonna. There is a Tuesday coming up where where we can't have class because I got something else going on. I can't remember if it's next Tuesday or Tuesday after that. It is no, take it back. I can do class next week. It'll be tight, but I'll make it. Never mind. I will be here. I am speaking. I have 2 speaking engagements and an MRI on that same Tuesday. But I'm gonna make it here. I got an MRI at 6:30 in San Diego, La Jolla, the VA Naval Hospital. I've got a speech in Oceanside at 9 or 10, and then I've got a speech in Temecula at 12:15 or 12:30, and then I'll come here. No, I'm not that busy. Easy stuff. All right. Section 2. We've kind of talked about this before when we talked about the Congress's ability to declare war, but let's kind of go over this stuff a little bit more. The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into actual service to the United States. So that means there's a time when the militia isn't called into actual service to the United States. When is that?
Time of peace.
Or when the state's called into service of the state. Remember, the militia can be called up either by the states or by the federal government. Militia being your state militia, National Guard, naval militia. Okay.
We the people.
And in our case, I guarantee you, we're not worried about what's in here if we got to take up arms and join the state militia. But because technically in the U.S. Code, the militia is actually defined in 2 ways. You have the organized militia and the unorganized militia. So the organized militia, naval militia, state militia, National Guard. The unorganized militia would be?
We the
You're
people.
looking at them, right? But in the unorganized militia in the U.S. Code, it actually gives like certain ages that are allowed to be part of the. Do you really think if the unorganized militia had to be called into service that anybody's going to care about age or anything like that? Yeah, be a gun behind every blade of grass, right?
Yep.
All right, so he's Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Navy of the United States. Always. There is no when called an actual service when it comes to that. When you're in the active military service, you're always in the service, unless you're a reservist, but, you know, when it comes to active, you're always, so he's always your Commander-in-Chief. So if he's always Commander-in-Chief over Army and Navy, does he need, and now don't get mad at me until I fully explain this, does he need congressional approval to wage war? No. Now that's not saying that the president can be a warmonger. There's two kinds of war powers. So it's right, war powers. There's two kinds of war powers. There's the power to wage war and the power to declare war. The president has the power to wage war, and Congress has the power to declare war. The president can wage war without declaration. But if he does that,